live up to that. I'm devoted to Oxford. Done lots of things in my life. I'm an ex-manufacturer of industry, still an ex-dairy farmer, farming 200 cows. For the last 40 years, a forester, and I have been very closely involved with Oxford University. So I want to take you, first of all, through the very simple aerodynamic rules of shelter. They're well known, they're tried and tested, and there's absolutely no dispute about them. Much of the early work was carried out in Tsarist Russia in order to combat the wind blow of soil erosion when the fertile Ukrainian steppe was opened up to grain production in Victorian times after the repeal of the Corn Laws. Much good work has been done all over the world, in America, in New Zealand, and in Africa. I was very fortunate to become involved in and to get funding for some significant work on the aerodynamic characteristics of shelter belts 20 years ago, done between the School of Engineering and the School of Plant Sciences of Oxford University. Now, wind chill is always a combination of wind speed and temperature. And the first rule is that the faster the wind, the lower is always the temperature. The opposite is equally true. Warm winds and temperatures can only come from slower winds. Any balloonist will tell you that the sky is built up as a series of plates of air streams of differing wind speeds with differing temperatures and of different depths of plates. They only come back together as turbulence, which is a confused structure by mixing wind speeds, humidity, and the resulting wind temperatures. Trees can provide a beautiful natural vehicle for creating shelter, which can then act as a natural greenhouse. The optimal shelter belt, which I'm now going to propose and to describe, is a sloping, porous structure and a permeable structure as shown in this leaflet, which I'm hoping you'll take away and study. The porosity comes from the species of tree chosen, from its shape, and from the filtering capacity of its leaves and branches. And some trees are much better than others in this respect. For example, birch and alder and aspen and Scots pine are very good, while others, and European larch is very good, while Lawson cypress and Leyland cypress are very bad. The principle of filtering air, if it's a very solid wall, the wind hits it and comes turbulence and makes things worse. Now, the optimum porosity of any barrier for creating shelter is actually 50%. And this large percentage can create a dramatic rise in temperature of the warmer and slower wind which filters through this structure. This warmer, slow wind forms a natural bubble, like a comfortable cushion, which then holds up the cold plate of faster wind above it, and which is racing up over the sloping profile of the shelter belt, and which also tends to gather speed and to increase its range. Just imagine the sloping fired trajectory of a wartime shell as it falls back to the ground several miles away as it loses its speed. What is the extent and the area of this sheltered area? We know this very definitely from an aerodynamic engineering point of view. It is 20 times the height of the tallest trees. So if a tree is 30 foot high, the sheltered area in the lee of the shelter belt is 200 yards, 600 feet. You're talking about several acres of land where wind chill will no longer be a significant factor and where higher temperatures and greater humidity will prevail. This, we believe, can now become a huge agricultural opportunity. This 20 times factor works whatever the height of the trees. So shelter can start to have useful and indeed measurable effects even before the trees reach 5 years old. Here is the next important point. What is the best width of a shelter belt? It is established that a width of only 5 meters can provide the optimum amount of shelter. This gives the least shading together with the maximum area of shelter and with the least loss of productive farmland. In other words, an effective shelter belt can just be an extension of an existing hedge, which are often well enough sited in connection with the direction of the prevailing wind and the coldest wind, usually the northeast wind. There are other useful and sensible and simple rules in our leaflet. The minimum length of a shelter belt should be 100 meters, and most hedge lengths of fields in the Cotswolds nicely exceed this. Use re-entrance where possible, and adopt a staggered planting layout for the best landscape effect. After our work was completed 20 years ago, we found that landowners could not be interested in these attractive ideas for one single and very perverse reason, and which we had not foreseen at the time. The countryside stewardship scheme and the single farm payment were just being introduced as part of cap reform at that time. A hedge became grant-aidable under the countryside stewardship scheme with a maximum width of 1.5 meters, and the Forestry Commission stopped their forestry woodland remit at a 20-meter wide shelter belt, shelter wood. So 5 meters fell between both stools as the rules became ever more and more complicated and restrictive, as anyone who has studied the 45-page woodland creation rulebook will know. And effectively, no shelter belts have been planted anywhere in England in the last 20 years because of this single bureaucratic entanglement and oversight, and which no one contested or thought about at the time. And I certainly didn't have the experience then to do anything about it. So we filed away our splendid funded piece of work, forgot about it, and we concentrated on other wider themes of woodland improvement and biodiversity. Earlier this year, as I was clearing out our old rooms, I came across this work. "250 pages of it. Out of nostalgia, I reread it before throwing it away. All I then had in my mind was a memory of engineers and plant physiologists fighting each other. Engineering and plant sciences have very different scientific disciplines with quite conflicting ideas of precision. Engineers are very black and white, it's right and wrong. As I reread it, I began to realize what a good bit of work it actually was, and that these Oxford scientists had done for us. The work was done in the wind tunnels at Oxford University and on sites outside Oxford. It took 3 years to do. A very good girl did it. I've been trying to get in touch with her. I think she went into finance after doing this work, but we may get her back on board if she's still around. It also occurred to me that maybe its time now at last has come. Forestry is a long-term business, and it does not matter when you start, and we foresters are meant to get better as we get older. And Jenny agreed with me. I knew and adored her wonderful father from many years ago, and thought it was well worth it. And she then introduced me to Lindsay Wistons, who's sadly not here, and she's absolutely brilliant, and we are missing her, and I'm going to try and cover her if I can. So Jenny agreed that I should visit initially 20 out of her 50 Elms Guardian farmers, and it's great to see 2 today, maybe more I haven't yet met, in the Upper Thames catchment, who are doing these elms trials for Jenny and Dan in Fueg, for DEFRA, and which is one of the many interesting pilots. I thought it was fascinating hearing from you, Jenny, what you're doing. And I get more and more encouraged as I see it. So, and in a month of starting these visits with Lindsay and myself, this is the result of our work in progress. I have visited 30 elms demonstration landowners in the Upper Thames catchment, farming 5,906 hectares in total. And they have offered us land for 56 shelter belts, totaling 20.42 kilometers, 20,420 meters, and totaling only 10 hectares of their farmland involving planting 62,523 trees. The majority of the Shelterbelts, almost all of them, involve widening to 5 meters existing gappy hedges, some with broken down stone walls. So the increase in biodiversity will be maximized and the loss of productive farmland minimized. We have paused there because we think well, we are hoping that this is a statistically significant enough sample from which both county and national projections for tree planting and optimum shelter belts can be made, and which DEFRA will in due course require. But I'll check these numbers and see whether we need to extend the trial. The other reason is that we need funding to plant these shelter belts, and which Jenny and Dan are doing an amazing job with. And I'll come on to that so far in a minute. So we have now so far 30 eager farmer partners who will let us have sites on their land, and some of which I hope to plant both this winter and next winter. And they are pushing us hard to deliver and to get trees in the ground. Lindsay and I intend to carry out a scientifically sound and statistically significant evaluation program for 10 years, and to provide evidence so that our OSB, optimum shelter belt ideas, may then become one of the several new and exciting options within the ELMS menu of prescriptions on offer. And what about biodiversity and natural capital? We all know that well-maintained hedges are beneficial, but we have so much anecdotal evidence that extended OSB hedges of 5-meter widths will be even better. Talk to several you ask a gamekeeper what he thinks of an OSB compared to a hedge. I've met a few. They don't need convincing, they're telling me. We intend to measure the improvement in our biodiversity and natural capital too, and learn about all these tools, and to use and to try and establish key measurable biodiversity indicators. Our farming partners are bursting to go, and they'll be our key partners in this projected program as we collect temperature and humidity data, measure live weight gains and crop yields, and other biodiversity indicators. We expect that there will be surprises as well as a useful increase in the body of practical knowledge and of what works best and where. So at the moment we're in the stage of drilling down the costs. As we go, we find really there are two areas of unacceptable costs in the Cotswolds. Very high cost, much higher than the high costs of planting the trees and getting them in the ground. First is deer are rampant everywhere here, and we need to consider that. The best solution, or far the most expensive, is to create a deer fence, which is rabbit fencing at the bottom and sheep fencing at the top. It's horrifically expensive, and we need 2 of them on each side. there are other ways of dealing with, and I think we have the opportunity, and I'm hoping we'll have the opportunities to try them all. Those with lower cost and higher risk. You know. For example, there are trees like alder, which birch a little bit, but which deer really do not browse at all. And so we may get away with, we'll come up with different ideas, and that's my job for this week, which I'm talking about because we're quite near across there, and we'll see which idea we can plant on which farm. And the other area that we're looking, which I consider also an unacceptable cost, is weed control. Remember, what we need to have is these Shelterbelts have got to be jolly good. They've got to be really roaring away from rear one. You know, we don't want any chance. So there are 3 methods of weed control, which different areas of cost. One is a traditional one of just weeding around it with glyphosate for 3 years. The other, on the opposite extreme, is putting wood chip all along the Shelterbelts, sufficient to drown the weeds. Third way is putting a permeable mat on, which you can plant the trees through in the Shelterbelt. So I think there'll be different costs. What we want to do is to come up with realistic costs for not just for our own interests and sake and to show that we are getting, but so that DEFRA, if we can feed these figures into DEFRA, this is another reason why they may begin to listen to our ideas, that we have got good evidence. Lindsay would have told you the really exciting bits from her side of we have really 3 areas of possible productivity improvement. I've talked a little bit about the biodiversity improvement and calculators, but more specifically, we came at it with the idea of productivity and crop improvement. And Lindsay is an expert in cattle, and she has a wonderful statistic, which I think I got right, is that cattle have a critical temperature. If they are below this temperature and have wet backs, it takes 15% more food just to keep them where they are. She's keen on in the uplands, where you are, sheep are the predominant crop. You know, the effective shelter is very dynamic. The key of profitability and or making ends meet, I should better call it in upland farming, is lamb mortality and ewe rejection. Those 2 factors, very measurable, are what we can do on crops. And we have the benefit of having really pretty awful land in the Cotswolds for growing crops. And but there's the technology there, and we have some farm sites we're keen on. Yours, Andrew, is one of measuring the different effects of crop improvement, and actually the downside. Woodlands can shade crops intensely and reduce yields. I was with one splendid guy where we could actually see this. He really didn't want to have shoulder belts at all. He said, "Look at this awful thing. This wood is." So I said, "Why don't you slice the wood back a bit?" He said, "The problem is I don't own it." There was no thing. So that's really the summary of what I just wanted to say, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity you've given me, Jenny, and I hope we can deliver. I hope we can plant, 15 to 20 miles of shelter, but you've got to have a good number to get these growing and in the ground. So please wish us well, and let Dan know if you would like to be kept informed as we report regular progress, or if you're able to become part